If you've been wanting to start a garden and you don't exactly know where to begin, you need a little bit of extra motivation, this video is for you. If you're new here, my name is Bella. I love all things design and DIY, and today we're going to be talking about my one true love, gardening. I hope to inspire people on this channel across all sort of genres, but if I can convince you to do one thing, I hope that it is to start a garden. I truly believe that there are very few things in life that are more gratifying than growing something from a seed to its final form and harvesting it. Gardening has completely transformed my life, and I believe that it can do that for you as well. I live in Ontario, Canada. It's February 1st today. Right now, not gardening weather. However, I think one of the biggest mistakes that beginner gardeners can make is waiting way too far into the season to start their garden, to start even thinking about their garden. February is the perfect time of year to just start dipping your toe in the water, start studying. If you truly don't know anything about gardening, use the winter to research as much as you possibly can. It can be very overwhelming to try to learn about everything in gardening as you go along. Now, there is something to be said for making mistakes and learning from them, and learning from observing your garden physically, being in it. You're going to be learning every single day of your gardening journey regardless. But what you don't want to do on your first gardening season is overwhelm yourself. So I would use the winter months to just leisurely research, jot things down in notebooks, figure out a few plants you want to try growing this year, and really delve into those. You won't be able to put any of the things you learn into action right away, so it might feel a little bit useless, but trust me, you're going to be very, very thankful that you did come springtime when you start planting. And on the topic of winter garden research, I want to introduce you to one of my favorite things ever. Seed catalogs. There's not too many things that you can still receive catalogs for these days. So these are an extremely satisfying thing to get in the mail. Basically, what they are is just books full of a seed company's inventory with growing notes and tips and stuff like that. And sometimes they'll do like little articles where they highlight certain plants. The really nice thing about seed catalogs as well is that they are, for the most part, free. However, this, I would say, is like the mecca of seed catalogs, and it is $12.95. And that is the Baker Creek Whole Seed Catalog. If you want to go a little nuts and kind of just have your gardening world completely shaken, get this seed catalog. I think they have another one that you can get sent to you that's just a very basic sort of format, and that one is free. But this one is absolutely stunning. Just look at this. And they have some of the coolest varieties of seeds. I think that's kind of their deal, is carrying these really rare and unique varieties, which brings me to my next tip, is to grow something that you're really excited about. There's definitely some very basics when it comes to gardening that I think people consider to be staples. You know, if you want to grow vegetables, then peas, beans, carrots, tomatoes, stuff like that. If you want to grow flowers, cosmos, zinnias, marigolds, there's some pretty solidified staples when it comes to garden plants. But I would encourage you to not really let that sway you too much. You don't have to grow what everyone else is growing, and I think it's really fun to get into something very specific. I've gardened my entire life, but it wasn't until about 4 years ago that I actually had my very own garden for the first time. Then it was a 20 by 20 plot, and the first year I was set on turning it into a pumpkin patch. I think I had somewhere around 20 different varieties of pumpkins and squash and gourds. I very heavily went into one thing, and then the next year I slowly added in other things, and it's been the biggest snowball effect of my life since then. So when you're perusing your seed catalogs, it can be a little bit easy to get carried away by all of these really cool, interesting varieties you see. And I wouldn't recommend going overboard with these, especially if they don't seem to be the most beginner friendly. But I do believe that it's always worth a shot. Every growing year is different and you never know really what you're going to end up with. So pick a few things that you're really excited about and dive into those. I think gardening is so universal. I really believe that it's something that as humans we were just meant to do. We were meant to grow things and tend to the earth and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think it makes sense that gardening can so easily relate to so many different interests and hobbies. And I think that can be a great motivator for you, regardless of who you are or what your lifestyle looks like, is to connect gardening to one of your interests that you already have. One of the most obvious ones would be if you're really into cooking. Gardening is a great way to experience flavors that you wouldn't normally be able to get from the grocery store. There's some vegetable varieties and herbs and spices and things like that that you just literally wouldn't be able to have access to unless you grow them. Not to mention the fact that produce from the grocery store just does not even come close to the taste of vegetables from your garden. If you're really into flower arranging, or maybe even if you are a florist, you could start a cutting garden. If you love building, you can use that skill to create different structures in your garden, build raised beds, things like that. If you're into natural remedies and medicine, there are so many medicinal herbs that you can dive into. I would say an herb garden is one of the easiest things to tend to, because so many herbs are perennial, meaning they come back every single year. They're beautiful and a lot of times pretty low maintenance, so I think that's a great option for beginners. Something that I've gotten into in the past few summers is weaving and basket making. And so one thing that I would really love to incorporate into my gardens in the future are plants that I'm growing specifically to harvest for basket making. That's one of my longer term goals because I think it'll take up a bit more space. But once you start thinking about how you can incorporate the garden into as many aspects of your life as possible, it makes it so much more of an enjoyable experience because it's not just one isolated hobby. When it comes to planting time, you have a few options here. You can obviously go and buy starts from the garden center, but if you opt to start things from seed, which I think is just so fun and the most gratifying form of gardening, one tip that I would give you that I am so guilty of not following is to not use your entire seed packet. Seeds don't really go bad. They do have expiration dates on the packages, but that's just because they have to. They're not going to go bad past that expiration date. Your germination rate might go down a little bit, which means the number of seeds that actually sprout is going to be a little bit lower the longer they're stored. But there have been seeds that are hundreds of years old that will germinate. So don't feel like you need to use all of your seeds up by that date that's on the package. You don't. Just make sure they're stored somewhere that's cool and dark and you'll be fine. There's a few reasons I think that this is important to remember. One, you're going to be really happy with yourself next year if you still have some seeds left over and you don't have to purchase as much, because gardening really can be extremely affordable if you are just a little bit conscious about it. And number two, I would keep this in mind because you don't want to overwhelm yourself with too many seedlings. Because when you go to transplant these into the ground, this is something that I've done so many times because I get very over enthusiastic in the springtime when I'm planting out seedlings and think denser is better. That's not true at all. For the most part, your plant's root systems are going to expand further than what you see above ground. So keep that in mind. The closer that you plant everything together, the more competition there's going to be to receive water and nutrients from the soil. So your plants will probably still grow, but they might not necessarily thrive. There's always spacing guides on the back of your seeds. Some plants can be a lot closer together and some need a lot more space. The next thing that I would keep in mind, regardless of what time of year you're starting, is that it's okay to just focus on mastering one season per year. Creating a garden that is in constant bloom and production throughout the whole year, or as much of the year as you can manage with your seasons where you live, that can take a lot of research and very specific effort to make sure that you're staggering all of those plantings in the right way. So it's okay if one year you want to really focus on spring bulbs and you want it to be this big show as soon as you can in the spring, and then after that you don't really know what to do. That is totally fine. You still learned all about spring bulbs. And then maybe the next year you can focus on planting a summer garden that's producing a lot of produce that you can preserve. Then the next year, maybe you put in some really foundational fall perennials like grasses and things like that. I'm really trying to be nice with myself about this one. I've planted garlic for the past few years in my garden, and it's been one of my absolute favorite things. And this past fall, I could not be bothered. I did, however, invest in some tulips and daffodils, and I got those in the ground because I was really looking forward to having that display in the springtime. I won't have any garlic next year, but I will have a lot of spring bulbs. I'm not beating myself up about it because every gardening year is so different. So I want to warn you about the online world of gardening. I'm not on TikTok, but I'm going to assume that this is very prevalent there, just like it is on Instagram and Pinterest. Beware that there are not that many gardening hacks that actually work well or work better than more traditional methods. And when I say this, I don't just mean traditional methods as in like Western ideas of gardening. Not at all. I think social media is such a great place, especially with something like gardening, to exchange different cultural agricultural practices and things like that. But if you see something online that is claiming to make your gardening life easier and it seems a little bit too good to be true, I would just be cautious and try to cross research this hack as much as you can. And if you can't really find any like validation from any other sources, I would say don't waste your time. Gardening is really hard work, but it's of course extremely gratifying. So I would stay away from too many hacks and just put in the work yourself, because chances are you're going to be very happy during the whole process. A really big thing to keep in mind, especially your first year gardening, is to scale your garden to something that you can actually manage. If that's a few pots out on a patio or a balcony, then that's amazing. If that's like a few 4x4 raised beds, perfect. But I don't think it's necessarily the best idea to do what I did and start with a 20x20 monoculture plot. That was a little bit ambitious. I learned a lot, but it was a lot of work and I was left with a few very discouraging moments. Now, I am a very 0 or 100 type of person, so I fully understand you if you have never gardened before in your life and you want to implement like 1,000 square foot garden and become self-sufficient in growing all of your produce in one weekend. I get you, I see you. Your feelings are valid, but they're probably not going to set you up for success. I think it's important to start with something that you know deep down, and don't lie to yourself, something that you know that you can actually manage, and focus on the wins that you had in that gardening season, and that's what's going to help you to expand the next season. This is very difficult. I'm speaking to myself when I say this. In a similar sort of vein of not doing too much, I think that it's really helpful to go into a new gardening season with just one goal in mind, one main goal. You can have a few different focuses, but I think to have one thing that you're really focusing on succeeding in, and then everything else you could say, okay, I tried and I learned things, but having a main focus I think can be really helpful. So last year, for example, my one main goal was to become as self-sufficient as possible in onions and garlic. Those are two very easy things to grow and two very easy things to store. And so I knew I had a good chance at success. I would say I was relatively happy. There was a few things that went wrong, but it was still nice to have somewhere to put my focus and something manageable to really dive into and learn about. And then every other win that year was just a bonus. Gardening is an ever-evolving journey where you will never truly become a master, and you will always, always, always be learning. I hear this from so many amazing gardeners who have been doing this for like 20, 30, 50 years, and they still say, I still feel like a student. It is such a fun community to be a part of. Gardeners are the best, by the way. Like, if you can make some gardening friends in your neighborhood and you can swap plants back and forth, tell someone you know who is a gardener that you want to get into gardening, and I guarantee you will have so many plants this summer that you didn't have to pay for, because gardeners are always so generous and willing to spread the joy of gardening. I would hope so, at least. If the gardeners that you know aren't like that, then you need new friends. Some of my favorite gardening resources are here on YouTube. So some channels that I absolutely love are Shay Elliott, Roots and Refuge, Whispering Willow Farms. Those are all really great channels if you're into more of like the homesteading kind of genre of gardening. You Can Eat the Grass is a great channel if you're interested in like market gardening or flower farming, even if you implement those things on a small scale. Epic Gardening is another great channel that really focuses heavily on individual plant growing guides, which I find really helpful, and they're just a lot of fun. And then if you're just looking for pure inspiration, you will learn a lot, but it's just so fun to watch, especially on a cold winter night. That is Gardener's World. There is so many episodes of this show on YouTube. If you just search Gardener's World, you have endless content to watch. These are beautiful British gardens, anywhere from like a tiny little plot in London to like huge royal gardens. Like, so much inspiration for every type of garden on that show. I absolutely love it. Speaking of Gardener's World, one of my favorite gardening books is The Complete Garden by Monty Don. If you spend any amount of time getting into garden research, you'll probably come across Monty Don. He is wonderful, and I love this book. It's a very, very comprehensive guide on anything from ornamental perennials to vegetable garden growing. Another really helpful resource that is a little bit less talked about, I think, is the Farmer's Almanac. Yes, you are getting into gardening. You're gonna start getting excited about things like the Farmer's Almanac, even if you never thought that that was possible. I can't wait to buy my edition this year. I don't know if this is like a universal sort of concept. I live in Canada, so this is the Canadian edition. But if you have a strong like agricultural sort of history in your country, I'm assuming you have something like this. This is like a little mini gardening magazine at the front, but what you really get this for is all of the weather and planet like maps and guides and charts. I'm gonna be honest, a lot of this I don't understand, but let me just show you an example. Like, it'll have a page of a month here. This is September of this past year, and it will point out like significant things to look out for in the sky, what the moon's going to be doing on what days, when the sun will be rising and setting. It's a very interesting resource if you are at all interested in like historical agriculture. You will find this very interesting. And it is actually very helpful when it comes to weather. I find it's pretty accurate. Also, check out your local thrift stores for gardening books. I've found so many great resources there that I turn to all the time. There's lots of like old gardening guides. So this one's really pretty. It's the Reader's Digest Gardening Secrets. So this has over 1,500 all natural gardening tips in it. I see this book at the thrift store all the time, and that's where I bought it. So things like this I think are pretty easy to find, and they are full of so much information. So these are really great as kind of like an index. If you have something specific that you're troubleshooting, head to the index of a book like this, and I guarantee you will be able to find some very old, tried and true methods on dealing with whatever your question is. Another type of book that can be helpful when it comes to troubleshooting is something like this. This is an insect, disease, and weed ID guide. This is specifically for North America. So make sure when you're looking for gardening books, if it's things that are hyper specific like this, that they are targeted towards your geographical area, because you want to make sure that all of the information that you have is completely relevant. So that is it for my beginner tips for gardening. I hope you found this video encouraging, and I hope it inspired you to start a garden this year. This is the perfect time of year to start planning and daydreaming. If you enjoyed this video, then please go out and buy a package of seeds in my honor. I would love to hear about any of your gardening ideas that you have for this season, whether you're a beginner or not. Please let me know down below. You can give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe so that you know every single time I post. I will see you back here next time.